This is Marcus Sankofa Nix. I am the host, the producer of the History Heals talk series. I'm excited and delighted to be able to be here for episode number 2. Episode number 1 was out of sight. It was dynamic. It was powerful. And I know that today will be definitely the same. Just wanted to mention a couple things before we get into our conversation. And we have our special guest, Alize Scott-Nowell, is going to be back with us for part 2. It was so good. The conversation was so rich and empowering. Had to have her join us again for part 2. But just a few things. I'm the host, as I said before, and I just want to just say that it's an honor to be able to serve the community in this capacity, providing a talk series to offer support and offer healing and wellness strategies for those who tune in local, near, and far. And when you tune in to our shows, to our episodes, you'll get a few different things. You'll get therapeutic conversation that blends history, mental health issues, and present day issues and topics. You'll also get practical wellness strategies that can be implemented day to day. You'll receive resources to aid and support your mental health, wellness, and understanding, especially through the lens of African American history and culture. And you also get an extended family and an extended community, which is definitely also important and so needed during this particular time. So yours truly has had the honor and privilege to work in a number of capacities, doing community-based grassroots work in the urban spaces of Baltimore City. I currently serve as the curator of the Howard County Center of African American Culture. I also am a historian, educator, storyteller. I have been in the school system of Howard County locally, where I am here in Howard County, Maryland, and I've done many, many different things. And so I thought it was necessary to have a platform such as this, to have discussions and conversations about how we can really centralize and normalize wellness and healing through the lens of African American history and culture. And so when I think about what that represents and what it means, I think about the quote from Dr. Joyce King that I'll raise up yet again, that I think is also true and important. She says, quote, "African American experiences serve as a pedagogical tool and an educational model indispensable not only to heal the Black community, but also for the health and wellness of everyone in this society. A society traumatized from emotionally and spiritual racial domination." And so that's from Dr. Joyce King. And when I refer to healing and we refer to healing, we're really referring to the process of the restorative process of becoming whole again in our thinking, in our living, and our being. So without further ado, without further delay, I definitely wanted to bring back in for episode 2. I wanted to bring back into our space the Alize Scott-Nowell, the professor, the community worker, and many other hats that she wears up in Jamestown, New York. All right. I know that many had a chance to get a glimpse of the work she does and had a chance to hear her powerful perspectives. And she had a chance to go into her research. And after last show, I said, "Hey, we're not done, my sister. We only getting started." And I said, we have to definitely have you back on our show, on our platform, to continue the conversation, because I believe very much so that what it was that we spoke about was so powerful, so refreshing. I mentioned also last time, we connected up in Buffalo at the 6th annual Teaching Black History Conference, and I thought your presentation was powerful. So I wanted also those tuning in local, near, and far to also have a chance to understand what your findings have been in the field and what the research has been that you've had a chance to uncover. And so today I'm glad to have you back. So welcome back, Professor Alize. How you been?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Me too.
I mentioned this last time, but just once again, for those who didn't have a chance to perhaps catch the last episode, just wanted to raise up some of the work that you're doing in your area. So you're the Director of Social Justice and Racial Equity at the YWCA of Jamestown, New York. where you utilize your expertise to build and implement programs that foster meaningful conversations about social justice issues with people of all ages. You're also a professor at Jamestown Community College, where you link relevant historical context to current contemporary issues in an introduction to sociology course and an inquiry course titled The Black Experience. And so there's many other things that I could say about you, but just wanted to definitely give a brief overview of the work you're doing. I know this does, what I said doesn't do justice, all the things you're doing, but nevertheless, definitely glad to have you back. And last time we had you, and we'll also have this be at the forefront of our episode today, the theme, Black Joy. Black joy is an act of resistance and a means of refusal. I know you spend time writing on this topic, researching this topic. I don't know, you may have even lost some sleep, even this right
Yeah.
here, topic and the theme. And I understand the struggle. I understand what it's like having walked that path myself. But let's go ahead and get right into it because I know time will get away. So if you could just briefly, for those tuning in, before we continue on our conversation, I just want to summarize, if you will, what it was that we spoke about last time we had our show. So, Black joy as an act of resistance and a means of refusal. What does that mean? Why is it important? Why is it relevant? And how did you gravitate towards that particular topic and theme? So, go ahead and speak to that, Professor Alize.
All right. So last time I talked about how I kind of got to that point. So when I was going through graduate school, it was right at the height of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. And, I was really just going through all these different emotions and feeling like I wasn't allowed to be happy. I wasn't allowed to experience joy because of what we had witnessed. And then, of course, the other videos that came out of various other Black people losing their lives to state sanctioned violence. Um, so it was a very confusing time for me. And I was like, I feel like I just need to kind of wallow in my sorrow and I can't really, muster up the strength to be happy in this moment, nor do I feel I'm deserving to be happy because of what is happening, because of the state of the Black community. So it was really that sparked me to look into Black joy because I'm on social media and I see kind of all these different platforms emerging that are talking about the importance as a Black community that we are preserving our mental, physical, and well-being during this time. So I was like, okay, yeah, I really can't stay in this moment of just being depressed and being sad, but I'm somebody who is fortunate enough that I can move through the world as a Black person and I still have my life. I still am able to live. I'm still able to be here and I can't just dwell in these moments of sorrow, but I also need to make sure that I'm experiencing happiness and experiencing joy and creating that for myself. So that is ultimately how I got to this place of writing my thesis around this topic of Black joy because also while this is happening, you do see these social media platforms. We have Black Twitter, Black Instagram, kind of these safe spaces that we have created, these counter publics that we have created online that use the hashtags such as Black Girl Magic or Black Boy Joy, whatever it may be. And so I started to dig deeper into that and just, at the same time as we're seeing these horrendous videos, there's also on the other side of that, these videos of Black people just laughing. I remember crying one time because somebody put together this compilation of Black people just laughing together. And I thought it was so beautiful and necessary in the moment to just really see that we are able to still be happy and that it's important that we preserve that. So that's kind of like what sparked me to write my thesis and to dive deeper into this topic of Black joy because we can't always just experience Black life through a lens of trauma, through a lens of tragedy, but we need to highlight those other aspects of it as well.
I thank you for sharing that. And as I have done a lot of educational consulting work, setting up curated displays and exhibitions in my gallery spaces as a teacher, teaching African American Studies seminar, doing a lot of work in various spaces, I always felt that it was important to provide these stories that were more than just the trauma that African Americans experience. Our experiences are more than our sorrow, our pain, our suffering. And as you said, oftentimes it's from a deficit-based standpoint in which we grapple with and engage with history, especially history from an African American lens. I remember Alize, my students, being hesitant to even take my course. Why? Because they thought that the first thing that was going to be talked about was enslavement.
Right.
The first thing that was going to be talked about was brutality, lynching, whips, chains, and all of those things. And yes, they occurred. However, that is not the totality of the experience. And the concept and the term Sankofa, as we look to the future, let us always remember the past. Let us not forget. So we, of course, definitely don't want to forget those experiences, but we know that it's much more rich than oftentimes those stories that are told. When we think about history, it affects us on many levels. On a national level, a community level, familial, even down to a personal level. And today I wanted to also spend some time also talking about your research and your findings, but also wanted to talk about you, Professor Alize. And the reason why I wanted to focus on you was because I definitely believe that history could be a vehicle to heal, hence, which is the name of this talk series, History Heals, right? So I want you to speak to your own journey. And you already have spoke to this a little bit about your response, reaction to the ways in which we've been depicted and stuff, but go deeper, your family, your upbringing, your background, how you cultivated this passion to even want to go deeper into this. And in terms of your self-concept, how you view yourself, how you see yourself, your confidence, or whatever it is that you want to share. How has this impacted your life? How has this impacted you on a personal level? What's your testimony?
All right. Yeah. So if you know me, you know that I don't get personal ever. But for the sake of this, I certainly will. So if we want to go back to childhood, I suppose. So I grew up in Jamestown, New York. That's where I currently live as well. And this is a predominantly white area. So I think our Black population is only like 2 or 3%. So not very big. So growing up, I had a lot of white friends, and then I also grew up in like a multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic family, and was raised by my biracial mother, who is white passing, and then also raised by my grandmother, who is Italian American. So although in the household, both my mother and my grandmother, they spoke positive messages into my sister and I, told us, you're smart, your hair's beautiful, you're beautiful, all these different things. Outside of it, in the classroom and of course interacting with my friends, like I didn't see anybody that looked like me, not in the curriculum, not in my circle. So I really didn't have this sense of pride that I do now, I feel like, because I was trying to, I guess, be white. I was trying to fit in with my circle. I would straighten my hair every day, make sure I had the same clothes as everybody, talk the same as everybody else. And I really just didn't understand who I was as a Black woman. So it wasn't until I got to college and I took my first course in African American studies. So it was hip hop and social issues taught by the amazing Dr. Peter Clavin. And it opened up like a whole new world because, again, I was not exposed to hardly any of this kind of material during my time in school, which I know a lot of, students aren't. And, you know, getting to this point, I think at that time I was maybe like 20, so quite a lot ways into my life. And that's when I was first exposed to it and really understanding where these stereotypes came from. Watching the video of Malcolm X saying, who taught you to hate your nose and the color of your skin and your
Yes.
hair? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, like, why do
Yep.
I feel this way about myself? So learning about the history of this, learning about the history of where these stereotypes came from and why there is so much internalized racism within the Black community and why we don't feel that sense of pride or we don't feel beautiful because of, how the outside white supremacist world has deemed us as undeserving of feeling like we are worthy of love, that we are beautiful people, whatever it may be. So taking this class really helped to open that up for me. And I remember, again, at that time I was still straightening my hair, but after taking that class, I did a big chop and I was like, okay, fro's coming out. Like I'm embracing everything about myself. And I'm still very, prideful in all the other aspects of myself as well when it comes to my culture. As I mentioned, I grew up with my Italian American grandmother. We still do, Italian Sunday dinners. Like I'm still very prideful in that aspect of my life as well. But I am a Black woman. I moved through the world as a Black woman. I experienced the world as a Black woman. So having this class and really being able to understand my history and my culture really just made me feel so proud to be a Black woman. And it was really this liberating experience. Just being able to know where I came from, and again, seeing other people that look like me and seeing all the wonderful things that they did, and seeing, Angela Davis walk into the courtroom with her afro and like what that signified for us. All of these things were so like, oh my God, yes, like, I love all of this and we are so amazing. And yeah, so just taking that class really helped to open that world. And I was honestly almost done with school, with undergrad at least at that point. But taking that class, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna add this as a minor. Yeah, I'm gonna now go on and like dive deeper into this, because I felt it was just so important for who I was and also who I wanted to become. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I got started with all of this, I suppose, and like how it affected my self-esteem and my self-confidence. Because I feel like as a little girl, not that I hated, being a Black person, but I feel like now I definitely have a different view on what it means to be Black, and I own it now.
Yes. Well, that's empowering. It's empowering to hear. I think it's important to share our stories, and I thank you and commend you for dipping your toe into the pool of vulnerability, so to speak, and sharing. And that's not always easy to do, even um, on a more broad scale. I do oftentimes a lot of oral history work and interviews with uh, those who are seniors or the elderly, or those who perhaps may be descendants from Black communities or Black families. And oftentimes it's not easy to come forth and to tell our story. We oftentimes talk about the erasure of history, books being banned, and the diminishing of history being taught from the perspective of Black voices. But oftentimes, I believe it's also important to not perpetuate that, but also not be afraid to tell our story. But it's not always easy, because we do know, yet again, that those stories are not always comfortable to address and comfortable to deal with. Yet, in you sharing your story, you may perhaps even give others permission to then tell their story. And we all are books and stories that are continuing to be written each and every day. And so it's just wonderful to see that unfold. And, I can say myself, history has definitely been a vehicle to help me be where I am today. And so, those counter narratives. I remember when I attended an after school program, and I remember really, I never really was taught a whole lot about Black history growing up, especially elementary on into middle school, even though I had a supportive family. And whatnot. But I remember going to a camp and we saw the documentary about Frederick Douglass. And I remember seeing him stand up and resist and fight back when he was sent to the location of where the slave breaker Edward Covey was. And he fought back and resisted. And then being an orator, abolitionist speaker, that right there was different than the passivity, the victimized nature, and just the docile servitude way in which I oftentimes was given that history.
Right.
So that's important. And, furthermore, I want you to speak to basically, the research you've done. You told us about your story, how it got you continuing to pursue this. And history heals. Your research, when you talk about this notion of Black joy, oftentimes we don't, as a people, I believe, Alice, say, even we feel like we're not worthy to have joy.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
worthy to have peace. In fact, we'll call them guilty pleasures. We'll put the
Right.
guilty in front of it to say, oh, well, it's a pleasure, but it's guilty. Like, why we got to feel guilty for having the pleasure, right? So Alize, speak to that more, and also tie into it as well what you have uncovered in terms of, spirituality and water. I'm going back there again, because I thought it was profound, and perhaps there might be more that you could say about that, and say there's some tuning in now that didn't hear last show, but tie that into it as well too, in terms of this Black joy piece as resistance, healing as a form of resistance, and then the water, the spirituality, and even faith, even just expound on that and speak to that, if you will.
Yeah. So I feel a lot of times people feel you can't have pleasure and activism like together, because it is kind of weird to think about like how are you going to find pleasure when you're fighting against racism?
The struggle. Ain't no time to
Right.
sleep. Ain't no time for pleasure.
Right. Like we should be like angry and like how are you like enjoying this? Like it's a weird thing to kind of think about. Um but there's a quote from Ingrid LaFleur, and she says that for oppressed people to intentionally cultivate pleasure is an act of resistance. So, again, it may seem strange, but in the last episode when we were talking, I brought up the book Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. And really, the whole book is just opening up this world of possibilities when it comes to doing this kind of work. Because I feel if we don't incorporate the pleasure aspect into it, that's when we give up. That's when we're like, I can't do this anymore. It's way too hard. Like, I don't feel like fighting this fight anymore. Like, it's too much. It's too much. Like, somebody else do it. Like, this is not my job. I don't want to do it anymore. And so she really talks about this importance of making sure that we're centering pleasure. And read kind of what she says, like the formal definition of pleasure activism is. So she says it's the work that we do to reclaim our whole, happy, and satisfiable selves from the impacts, delusions, and limitations of oppression and or supremacy. So it's really about savoring our lives and really finding time to feel good whenever possible, which again, I know may seem weird when we're doing this kind of work, when we're fighting against racism, but we can see how it's already unfolded. So if you look back at the Black Lives Matter movement in the recent years, and even when it first, came about, the fact that we incorporate music and dancing while we're fighting and resisting and calling out police brutality and acknowledging, all of these different oppressive structures and systems that we need to be fighting against, we're still making sure that we're incorporating these cultural aspects such as music into these events to, again, create these spaces that feel safe for us, that feel, okay, yes, this work is tiring. We may want to cry. We may want to yell, get angry, whatever it may be. But look at this community that we also have. Look at the solidarity that we have together. Look at us coming together. And we should also be enjoying each other's company while we're doing this work and uplifting each other and making sure, again, that this is as pleasurable as possible. And in the book, she also, so part of the book is her like own writings, but she also uses work from other women of color and their writings. So she refers to Audre Lorde's work, Uses of the Erotic. And when we're thinking of the erotic in the sense, of course, it's not just limited to sexual pleasure, but instead, and especially in terms of resistance, Lorde explains that once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy, which we know ourselves to be capable of. So when we're thinking of Black joy as an act of resistance, this joy, if I know that this is possible, if I know that a life that is free of oppression is possible, that I can feel happy all the time, I'm going to demand that constantly. So when I'm seeing that there are structures and systems in place that are going to limit that, that are going to end that, or try to just keep me from experiencing that altogether, that's no longer acceptable. So when we're thinking of joy, when we're thinking of pleasure, when we're thinking of activism all combined in this aspect, it really encourages us to keep doing this work, to look at the lives that we want to have, that we want to lead, and even the lives that we want to leave for future generations. Like, no, there needs to be joy. I know that this joy is possible, so now that is all that I expect from life, and I'm going to continue to fight and to thrive until that reality is such. And it's also very important when we're thinking of, the future, and if we're tying in Afrofuturistic elements of this. So when we're thinking of like Black joy, it really helps to situate ourselves in the future and think beyond the present moments that we're in, these present moments of oppression. And that is so important, because when you are a Black person and you're constantly seeing, the state sanctioned violence, you're constantly seeing people like you being murdered and it being live streamed and pictures being spread all around the world, you start to question, what does this mean for my fate? What does this mean for me as a Black person moving through this world? And some of us, we almost start to prepare ourselves for a shortened life, a life that is going to be cut short. So instead, when we start to prioritize things like joy and situating ourselves in the future, again, it allows us to know that this is possible. So instead of us thinking, okay, I am moving through the world in a body that is most vulnerable to death in a society that was not meant for our survival, when we're thinking about cultivating this joy as kind of not just a response to oppression, but as a way of living, we know, again, I can now see myself in the future, and it's going to be a happy future. It's going to be a positive future, a future that is free of all of these other things, all of these things that are limiting, all of these things that are threatening, all of these things that, again, are posed to create a premature death, if you will. So it's very important for us to have joy in every aspect of our lives. So that way we're not giving up. We're not thinking, well, what is the point? I know that as a Black person, these systems are stacked against me. I don't have any more fight in me. It's done. It's over. But instead, if we have that joy with us, if we're always creating this joy, we're like, no, I have something to live for. Like, I'm happy. Like, I'm enjoying my people. I'm enjoying life. I'm enjoying the world. Like, regardless of what's going on around me, I know that this is possible. So it really just helps to keep us going and to keep us motivated.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh boy, there's so much that you said. And I thank you for offering all that you offered. Um, when you speak about this Afrofuturistic element, and we know that in our community, and I won't just say in the Black community, I'll say in all communities. But even if I hone in on the Black community, we know that anxiety is really, really a big thing. And this notion of forecasting or seeing the future and then perhaps having a dismal um, outlook on it. Fear, hostility. Will I be able to even make it to a certain point, as you mentioned, a foreshortened sense of future? And you're taking me back to a book here that I know you've got into in your research and in your work, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing by Dr. Joy DeGruy. If this isn't in your library, it's definitely a good book to have in your library. I believe Dr. DeGruy did a great job, but this stuff is real. Not even knowing if we're going to see tomorrow, or not even knowing if we're going to see, the future. What is the future? Or I'm so busy dealing with what's in front of me today, I don't have time to deal with the future. All I can focus on is the moment. And I do believe that it's also good to be present in the moment, because oftentimes I think, Professor Alize, we can get so fixated on the future, we can't deal with the now. We can't stop and smell the roses, which is what I'm sure, as we've been talking, It's nice to get out there in nature and sniff the roses and to look at the rippling in the water. So I would also say it's good to be able to imagine ourselves beyond oppression and
Yeah.
beyond racial hostility. And we can have joy, we can have peace, we can have
Yeah.
happiness. But I would also, suggest that, hey, I think it's also good to be present and in the moment as well too. And I think there's work to be done in that area as well. Um, I think with what you said, I mean, there's just so much. Um, Harkening back to Audre Lorde and you mentioning, uses of the erotic and being able to feel deeply all aspects of who we are. I've come to realize in my research and in my work that there's a deficit, but there's a negativity bias. It's so easy to go to the deficit, the negative, the gloom and doom. We talked about how history presents that, but even as we internalize that in the self-talk we tell ourselves, automatically gravitate us towards that. But to what you're putting forth, to what you're referencing with Audre Lorde, we got to be able to experience all aspects of who we are. And on that spectrum is that joy too, is that happiness, unapologetic happiness, I'll say. I think that's very, very important. But I need you to help me out, and I need you to help the listeners out, Alize, because we got to be honest. What you saying, Professor Alize, sounds good, but how what does this look like? What does it look like in real time? I mean, shoot, I'm dealing with racial oppression, on the job. I got family duties and responsibilities. I'm in the struggle, for our people. And, I'm trying to, time is money. I'm on my grind for liberation. I mean, I don't have time to rest. I don't have time to sleep. What does this look like? How can we be intentional about making this joy a priority? How can we be intentional about normalizing it? What is it that we have to do in real time to make this real? Because a lot of times we're overwhelmed.
Right.
We're drowning. So
Yeah.
break it down for us. What does this look like? How can we implement this on a practical level?
Yeah, so I first just want to say that when we're thinking about resistance, especially if we're approaching it from like a historical standpoint, and we're thinking about our ancestors and like what they did, it's important to know that we don't have to be martyrs. So we don't have to be the MLKs, we don't have to be the Malcolm X's, but those small little things are also important as well in this fight of resistance. And it's also important to note that it is okay if you're just saving yourself. If you are just making sure that you are preserving yourself as a person, or preserving, yourself and your family or your friends or whatever it may be, you don't have to be out here marching in the streets or doing these big elaborate things in order to be an activist or in order to resist what is happening within the Black community as far as oppressive structures. So I just want to note that first, like you don't have to be out here doing anything crazy, but it's important that you are saving yourself ultimately. Always start there, I feel is important. But obviously this pleasure is going to look different for everybody. So it's really just digging into what feels good to you, like what makes you happy. So for myself personally, I know that when I first started this journey, again, going back to just learning about it, so learning about my history in undergrad, I remember how much that took a toll on my mental health. So I was loving that I was finally being exposed to my history and learning about where I came from. But on the other side of that, I remember going into my professor's office hours and I was like, hey, I'm becoming the angry Black woman. Like this stuff is making me so mad. And I really don't know like how to deal with it. I was like, I love your class. I love what you're teaching me. I was like, but I'm getting very angry because I've never been exposed to this before. It's so much all at once to kind of take in. And when I was outside of the classroom, I would start kind of spiraling and going down these rabbit holes of, okay, we talked about this today, but I need to learn more about this. And like, how did this come about? And how is it still relevant today? And like, why is it still relevant today? Why is it still happening? Like, we're in the 21st century. Like, this is just wild. And so I just remember like actually feeling like I was going crazy because I was like, oh my gosh, like this is just so much to take in, and to realize that although we've come so far, we still have so far to go. And then once I started actually doing the work, so getting involved in local activism again at the height of 2020, I just remember being so sad all the time and also very angry, but also like, I don't want to leave my house ever. I don't want to talk to anybody, but I'm also ready to go to war. Like it was just constantly going up and down and just going through, as you mentioned, that anxiety of, okay, like I have to do this fight and it's so overwhelming. Just being a human being is like a lot of work to do. But then when you're faced against all of these different structures and systems, it becomes very daunting, and also feeling like you have to do something. Like, okay, this is affecting me and people around me. Like I feel like I need to do something. If I don't do something, like does that make me a bad person that I don't have my hand in this fight? So definitely took a toll on my mental health. But I will say that for me, going back to different cultural elements were very important. So going back to music and really just listening to music across genres and across time periods, and music that was empowering and uplifting. So, James Brown, Nina Simone, Kendrick Lamar, like incorporating it, making a whole playlist. On my phone, I have a playlist called Empowerment. So whenever I'm kind of feeling down doing this work, I put that playlist on because it just gives me a boost of energy that I need to be like, okay, I got this. Like I have some people in my circle, some people in my corner, like even if it's people that don't even know me, like I can just feel when I listen to the music that sense of community that I feel sometimes is lacking when we're doing this work. Sometimes this work can be very isolating, especially if you're doing it in an area where, again, you just make up such a small portion of the overall population there. Another thing that I do personally is really connect with nature. So going out in nature, getting grounded, as we talked about last time, this importance of water within the Black community and how it can offer these healing aspects. So my husband and I, we frequent this spot where there's like a waterfall and a swimming hole, and like it goes into like another body of water, whatever. And just sitting there and being in peace, and really just this healing nature that water has. So that's very important. Going back to kind of,
Absolutely.
again, these historical elements that have always been a part of our community and what water has signified for us. So as I mentioned last time we talked, water was kind of this horrifying sight, but at the same time, it was a way to transcend into a life or a world that was free of all of this kind of oppression. So, especially when we're looking into spirituality and baptism, especially, it was really this freeing thing for us. Water was this way to, again, transcend into a world that was free of oppression. So, when we're thinking about during the time period of enslavement and Black people weren't allowed to play a hand in Christianity or participate in Christianity, at least not at first, once they started to be able to go into kind of that realm of religion, baptisms became very important because even though their bodies were in bondage, having that release in the water was a way to free their spirit, and kind of a way of resistance when you think of it that way. Like, okay, you may have my body in chains, but my spirit is free. That is not anything that you can take away from me. That's not anything that you can physically shackle. And I am going to use this water as a way to cleanse myself, to be reborn, and to live holy despite everything that's happening. So water has definitely become very important for me, whether it's me just sitting in water or just being near like running water. Like just the sound of it is very peaceful and relaxing. So I highly recommend that to people. But again, it's just whatever feels right to you. If it's cooking or eating or going on a hike, going on a jog, exercising, reading books, I do that a lot as well, going for drives, whatever it may be. It just needs to be something that feels good to you. Personalize it to you and whatever that looks like.
Yes, I thank you so very much for that. And um, I believe it's important to, oftentimes, like you said, we start big. And
Mhm.
sometimes we could defeat our efforts before we even get started because
Yeah.
the expectation is so high. I know personally, for me, I like to journal. And I like
Mm.
to, if I'm going through a lot, a lot of stress, a lot of things happening. I need to process stuff and do some reflecting and whatnot. I'll take to journaling. That could be something that could be a therapeutic modality for me. I also, in recent times, past few years, have gotten into drumming. I find that drumming, especially djembe drums and African drums, but it doesn't have to be drumming. It could be, a drum set or a drum kit that's a part of a live band, but drumming through rhythm. And of course we can dance to drums, but just the harmonizing of the tap and the beat harmoniously in drum circles. I know we used to do that. Shout out to the TNAT Holistic Wellness Center in Baltimore, Maryland, a wellness center that's all about community empowerment and community healing, and mindfulness meditation. Once again, everything may not work for everybody, but as this platform is one of the purposes is to provide some tangible, practical ways we can support ourselves when we perhaps may be in the midst of challenge and difficulty, adversity, stress, crisis even. And I would even say we don't have to wait for the crisis to happen.
Right. Yeah.
We'll wait and then we become reactionary, and we'll ignore the signs that were leading up to that point. I think it's also important, as you were talking, Alize, to really, we have a lot of addictions. And when I say addictions, and when I referenced this last show, but when I say addictions, we have a lot of different types of addictions. And I'm not talking about solely perhaps, those who may get caught up in drinking and different drugs and different things. But I'm talking about the addictions of busyness. In this society, oftentimes this notion of busyness is an addiction. We overschedule stuff and we don't have boundaries. And I would say we have to set boundaries. I think it's important to set boundaries. And when I say set boundaries, I'm also careful when I say that, because I know sometimes the black and white notion of thinking in us can have us, okay, well, I'm going to cut everybody off. I'm going to cut everything off. So I don't mean to just cut off the world, but oftentimes we might be people pleasing a little bit too much, or we may be afraid to say no sometimes, or even being assertive and expressing ourselves and communicating our voice. So I would say sometimes we have to sometimes say no. We can't take on everything or do all the things. And I think that also is important as well too. Amelia Yellowhorse Braveheart, who does a lot of work in indigenous trauma, historical trauma with Native American communities. She has a lot of good research and work. And one of the things that I've captured from what she's put forth is how when we look at our ancestors and what they had been through, the atrocities and the hardships they faced, we will then take on that and then be extra hard on ourselves, not giving ourselves permission, as you're saying, Alize, to pace ourselves and have that joy, because we're doing this for Big Mama. We're trying to get reparations back for Uncle Joe. We're doing it for Malcolm Martin, Marcus Garvey. Shout out to Marcus Garvey. Just recently, we recognized, celebrated him. But for all the ancestors, Mama Harriet. So we're trying to now overcompensate for what they did. But even our ancestors, if they was alive, would even tell us, hold on, we got to pace ourselves. They had ring shouts and hush harbors, and they had sacred spaces where they were able to replenish and restore. And I would even posit, even our ancestors, we love them, but our ancestors may have even given us some things to think about to maybe even do different, because they were also human beings as well too. So with what you're saying, Alize, and I really appreciate you being back on the show, we have agency. Have agency. And so it's important to not lose sight of that. As we get to the close, we're not there yet, but I just wanted to make sure that I gave you another opportunity to share what it is that you wanted to share with the listening audience, those tuning in. What is there that you want to add to the conversation that you haven't already shared? What is it that you want to continue to share and remind us about or offer up? Talk to us a little bit more. What else did you want to share for our show for today?
I mean, we don't have a lot. I don't think we have enough time for me to share everything I would like to share, but
we got to do a number 3. Go ahead, Alize. Whatever it is that you want to share,
So as I had mentioned, I think I mentioned it in the last one, I love like quotes. So there are a couple quotes that I would like to kind of just share with everybody. So we mentioned a lot like our ancestors and the work that they did. And there's a quote from Bettina Love that says, our ancestors really pushed their bodies and their minds to the limits for us to one day thrive. And so I feel like when we're doing this work, it's important that we think about that and recognize that these sacrifices that they made shouldn't be in vain. So they have set the foundation, they have laid the blueprint, so that way we could have better futures. And as I mentioned, we've come so far, but we still have a long way to go. But because of what they did, we have the current state that we have. We're no longer physically bonded. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so it's important that we think about those things as well. And we're like, no, we're able to breathe a little bit because of the work that they did. And it's important that we actually take the time to have those breaths, And so that is one quote that I want to say. And then one that I also think is very important is a quote from Toni Morrison. Huge fan of Toni Morrison's work. If you're not familiar with it, highly suggest looking into her interviews and her literature. It's phenomenal. But when I'm thinking about joy, and I did write this in my thesis, is that I want to make sure that our generation is known for the joy that we were able to cultivate. And Toni Morrison, she has this quote where she says, "Finally, in this long trek through 300 years of Black life, there was joy, which is what I mostly remember. The part of our lives that was spent neither on our knees nor hanging from trees." And I just think that that is so beautiful. Again, when you're thinking about the history, where you're thinking about where we started, if you're thinking about, us literally praising the heavens and the gods and asking us or asking them to free us from this bondage, using water as a way to escape the life of oppression that we are experiencing here and transcending into the afterlife, transcending into a better place for us, even if that meant by way of death. And then when we're thinking about the lynchings that happened after slavery was over and how lynchings heightened, because now our bodies were no longer a valuable commodity. We're no longer in bondage. We're no longer, producing this economy for America. And so we were no longer, that was probably the only point that the Black body was valued, if we're being honest. And so once that system ended, that is really where you see this decline in the value of our bodies and the heightened of lynchings. And while we can still say that the modern, state-sanctioned violence that we're seeing is a form of lynching in itself, because again, lynching goes beyond just hanging somebody from a tree, but it's really just this act of instilling terror in somebody, inflicting this prolonged pain and torture on them. But again, when we're thinking about it in today's sense, we have moved so far away from these things. And now, again, we're able to breathe. We're able to experience joy in a more open manner. We no longer have to run away to little spots in the woods that we have created to experience each other and moments of happiness. But, we actually have joy. Happiness is a fleeting thing. Happiness depends upon your happenings and what's around you. And am I happy in this moment, or am I happy with things that are happening in my life? But instead, we are just creating a joyful being, a joyful presence, and really recognizing like our sense of purpose in this world, which is just to thrive and to love each other. I know that sounds like kind of hippie, but like that's really what I think about. Like when I feel what our purpose here is in life is just to love and to experience and to have all of these moments of pleasure and again, in every aspect and realm of our being and what that means. And of course, it's going to look differently for everybody, but it's just important that we are aware of that. Our ancestors did all of this hard work so that way we could take a step back in a more joyful life than what it was that they experienced.
Absolutely. And it's important every day to reclaim our humanity, to reclaim that and be unwavering in that, and to live on our own terms.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done, but I mean, I appreciate what you have provided us and what you have offered us. Go ahead and once again give those tuning in your contact information in case someone wants to follow up, get more information, resources, or just want to connect. What's your contact info?
Yes, so I can be reached at my email at the YWCA. So it is ascott@ywcajamestown.com. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. If you'd like a list of resources to dive deeper into different topics on Black history, I would be more than happy to help.
Yes, yes. And so I am so delighted and happy to have you back on for episode number 2. Some information about myself and the business. History Heals Consulting. All right. HistoryHealsConsulting.com is where you can go to learn more about our resources and what we offer. We offer a number of services under the realm of wellness groups, supporting the mental health and wellness of educators, those in organizations, businesses, companies, so on and so forth. Primarily those in the educational sector, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. Speaking engagements, keynotes, educational consulting, book studies, professional development, trainings and workshops, DEI, so on and so forth. So understand that History Heals Consulting is a means and a way to restore yourself, to really focus on your mental health, and to use the lens of history, as we've been talking today, to inform our practices of supporting ourselves, mind, body, and spirit wise. You can reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at History Heals. I'm on Facebook, History Heals Consulting there. Also on X now, at History_Heals, and on LinkedIn, Marcus Sankofa Nix. When you go there, you will see History Heals Consulting. Also, hop on our YouTube platform. That's where you can get this show, this episode, and all, and the one we did previous, and all the ones to come down the line. If you want to send me an email, feel free to do so. I am at info@historyhealsconsulting.com. So once again, glad that you all were able to tune in. Those who were able to tune in and listen. Shout out to the brother assisting me, co-producer, brother John Logic. Shout out to him. But nevertheless, I am so excited that we were able to have another episode really focusing on Black joy as an act of resistance and the means of refusal. Professor Alize Scott-Nowell, glad to have you back with us yet again. I will say this. I'll conclude with this quote by James Baldwin. He said, "History is not the past. It is the present. We carry our history with us." And so with that being said, we're going to carry something. We can carry the legacy of trauma, of gloom and doom, of deficit, of defeat, of victimization, or we can lean into that, embrace it, and then carry a story of legacy, of restoration, of triumph, overcoming, and healing. We are worth it. We can have joy. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and conclude for today. Until next time, thanks, Professor Alize. Continue to tune in to what we have to offer, and we're going to sign on up out of here. All the best, peace and blessings to those tuning in. Peace out, everybody.